Yes. So anyway, I shall start. I hope this light will go off because it's getting in my eyes. But time and society provide us with images of the world. Each generation takes the image and changes it a bit or a lot. Our images undergo greater changes than we do ourselves. Today, I'll talk about 3 such changing images of the world: home, machines, and the future. Part 1. I hope I'm trying to change the slide. It's not working. So it's this way. Oh, thank you. I've done it. So part 1, home. One of the most important images close to our hearts is the home. My example today is a very small home. It is just a room, an ideal room for one person. In 1932, Architectural Review published an article by Oliver P. Bernard, architect and industrial designer. His subject was the project for one-room flat designed in 1884 by the Dutch hydraulic engineer Cornelis Meyer. That's him. Originally, Meyer's drawings were published in Italy in a book. Most of them dealt with the rebuilding of Rome, but somehow this room was included. We don't know how big the room was to be, but Meyer made detailed illustrations of its 4 walls and numbered and annotated everything in the room. First wall, number 8. By the way, you will find there are some small numbers in each of these drawings. Number 8, cupboard for books. There are several of these. Number 11 is a tube for listening to conversation in another room. Number 12, a similar tube for speaking to others without leaving the room and without being overheard by those around, and a tube for calling from afar. Number 14, the door is in the center. This is for hens, which enter from the garden and lay eggs in the room without inconveniencing anyone. Okay. Second wall, number 31, the camera obscura for seeing who passes in the street without leaving one's bed. The bed, number 22, is in the center. Number 37, cupboard for holding silver basins and decanters. Third wall, number 49, spyglass made with a concave mirror to observe who passes in the street. Number 53, top left, cage for birds. Fourth wall, number 70, chair for resting during the day with tapestry above to divide the room into 4 parts. Number 76, table for cleaning and sharpening knives. Number 82, washing up device that does not leak. This is discreet, so well engineered that I couldn't find it in the picture. This room has everything that one could desire. Its owner, he's obviously a bachelor, has everything conveniently placed. It is an ideal one-room flat for one person. Every need is catered for. The one-room flat has certain similarities with something we are more familiar with today, the iPhone, which also attempts to answer all the needs of one person. Like the room, it is private, it is not shared, it is small, but allows access beyond its confines in every direction. Camera obscura of the room is now the camera. Tube for listening to conversations is now the phone. Virtual reality at large may be our world today, but this small electronic object is our home, with our address book, music, books, and photographs. These are possessions and treasures of one person. The first wall of the 17th century one-room flat provides a nest for a little dog. It is number 20. The number is so small, it is difficult to find. The dog must be very small too. So far, no mobile phone provides an animal companion, but perhaps it is only a question of time before the iPhone includes a digital pet, like or better than the Tamagotchi, which arrived on the scene in 1996 and required nursing, playing with, and disciplining, all done by pressing buttons. Neglect by the owner was punished with increasingly loud squeaks and other less friendly noises at all times of day and night. Each new edition of the iPhone can be trusted to add something to improve our lives. Next time, it might be a dog, like this one. I hope so. The notion of privacy is today as important with the mobile phone as it was for the occupant of the one-room flat, where even the hens were unobtrusive and where the occupant could observe the world outside without being observed himself. In 1985, I went to a design school in the Dominican Republic to run a course about the idea of what is a home, or what it could be. At the end of the week, I asked each student to make a model of their ideal home and to photograph it against a real background of nature or a town, so that in a slide it might look convincingly like a real building. And here are 4 examples. The students were also asked to describe their ideal home in words. Most of the descriptions included 2 basic requirements. One was that nature should encroach into the interior. In the Caribbean, perhaps this is not surprising, but what did surprise me was the second requirement, that the home would be occupied by each student alone, whatever its size. Visitors, I was told when I insisted, would be welcome, but they wanted to live alone. Another example of a home for one person is a children's book by Stefan and Franziska Temerson, published in 1938. This is Mr. Rouse Builds His House, or in the original Polish, Pan Tom buduje dom. Pan Tom, that is Mr. Tom, wants a small house with a red tiled roof, a balcony with flowers, and a garden with a tree. When he goes to an architect to select a design, he is shown various possibilities. Houses for a snail, a mole, a bird, and a house on stilts. No, obviously these won't do. Once the house he desires is agreed upon, and here it is on the book jacket in the center, the construction takes some time. The interior must be painted, water must be connected, and electricity installed. He also needs a clock to tell the time, to be sure that the restaurant he goes to for his breakfast will be open. There is no mention of other occupants, there are no guests, and there is no kitchen. Like the ideal 17th century room and like the iPhone, it too would be a private space for one person. So what's new? In a way, nothing. Everyone wants their ideal home to suit them and nobody else. Only that today the home can be in our pocket. The new home, the phone, is a small machine and is one of a number of machines that we depend on for nearly everything. And so, in part 2 of my talk, I shall talk about machines, and specifically those that have become the subject of art and the meaning and the means of making it. It took 20 years for André Malraux's Musée Imaginaire, which he wrote about in 1947, to become a reality. The Musée Imaginaire was to be a museum of reproductions, a museum of unlimited images in unlimited editions. Malraux, of course, did not realize the consequences of his dream with which we live today. He couldn't have imagined that a day would come when there would be more art than bread, that one day nearly everybody could be an artist in the sense that he or she would have the means to make still and moving pictures ad infinitum. The artist might be asleep while the machine would go on producing images in programmed variations. Nor could Malraux have anticipated that one day we might be unsure of what art is. Some machines, of course, are, or we think are, works of art. Among these are robots of Bruce Lacey, which are operated by remote control. Rosa Bosom, she is radio-operated, simulated actress. She's on the left. She occasionally slapped her enormous red lips on the visitors' faces by the way of welcoming them to the Cybernetic Serendipity exhibition, which was on at the ICA in London in 1968. And that is the year I want to talk about for a while. Mate, here on the right, is a more modest robot who just followed Rosa Bosom around. Robot K456 by Nam June Paik was a female robot who functioned very occasionally, moving with unsteady gait through the exhibition. Most of the time she, and yes, it was a she, stood quietly next to a child's drawing of a robot. K456 was a famous robot. I say was because some 20 years later, she was run over by a car on 6th Avenue in New York. Who knows why Namjoon Pike permitted this to happen? But for a short time, it was the talk of the town, and the event was televised and reported on the news. One of the most popular works in the exhibition, that Cybernetic Serendipity, was SAM, Sound Activated Mobile, by Edward Ignatowicz. Its head was like a flower on top of an articulated spine of polished aluminium vertebrae. Microphones fixed like stamens in the center of the flower picked up ambient sounds of which certain frequencies elicited a range of responses. Sam turned towards the source of a quiet sound in an attitude of attentive listening. Children were very good at modulating their voices, but adults tended to be embarrassed by the idea of talking to a machine and talked too loud for some to respond. Having been able to communicate with Sam, children would then approach another robot without realizing its limitations. Albert, by John Billingsley, did very little. He turned his head occasionally at random in one direction or another, and that was all. And yet, people talked to it, hoping to elicit a response. The animation of the inanimate, the desire to communicate with machines, represent both our dreams and our limitations. And so I come to some other robots by Bruce Lacey, which were not in the exhibition, but which emphasize this point. In 1968, Lacey wrote some notes entitled "On the Human Predicament." Given a brain, man has the possibility of developing into a sublime, happy, creative, and unique creature. But he's prevented from realizing this potential by the severe limitations imposed on him by the environment he has created for himself in order to survive physically. In my robots, Bruce Lacey continues, and humanoids, I attempt to present this predicament. In my events, I attempt to ask questions, and in my simulations and environments, I attempt to point direction towards the answer. In attempting to solve these problems, I use all advances in technology, electronics, psychology, market research, medicine, and mathematics at my disposal, using, in fact, the very hardware that has brought about these problems in the first place. Bruce Lacey made robots that warned us about the future and about being victimized by those in power. His robots commented on both their predicament and ours. This is Superman 2963. Lacey said about him, man's obsession with the machine as being the god that can give him more leisure time is symbolized by this construction. This is a man who has been dehumanized by the machine and has become, in fact, a machine himself. Now, he just performs a few simple operations designed to make him feel he's still human. Oh boy, am I living? This robot with a Belisha beacon for a head looks quite happy. All the robot can do is to move its leg up and down. But the government is sending him happy thoughts, and so he believes that he's still a fully functioning human. But 1968, when Bruce Lacey was making these robots, was not generally a time of cynicism. On the contrary, it was a time of optimism about technology. The London-based magazine Running Man, whose subject was every sort of revolution, published the San Francisco Digger poem next to an image of a contemporary computer. And this is the poem, all watched over by machines of loving grace. I like to think, and the sooner the better, of a cybernetic meadow where mammals and computers live together in mutually programming harmony, like pure water touching clear sky. I like to think, right now please, of a cybernetic forest filled with pines and electronics, where deer stroll peacefully past computers as if they were flowers with spinning blossoms. I like to think, it has to be, of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and joined back to nature, returned to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all watched over by machines of loving grace. So that was 1968. More than 40 years on, and everywhere we are watched by machines, and it has little to do with loving grace. Part 3, the future. It's not an easy subject, especially for the turkey as we're approaching Christmas. In 1881, Oscar Wilde wrote in the Pall Mall Gazette, "It is a fact that civilization requires slaves. The Greeks were quite right there. Unless there are slaves to do the ugly, horrible, uninteresting work, culture and contemplation become almost impossible. Human slavery is wrong, insecure, and demoralizing. On mechanical slavery, on the slavery of the machine, the future of the world depends." And of course, this is 19th century. Now, Siegfried Giedion, Swiss historian and critic of architecture, writing 57 years later in 1948, saw it differently. Never has mankind possessed so many instruments for abolishing slavery, but the promises of a better life have not been kept. All we have to show so far is a rather disquieting inability to organize the world, or even to organize ourselves. Future generations will perhaps designate the period as one of mechanized barbarism, the most repulsive of all. Is mechanization value-free? Can it really be neutral? Or is it another apple for Eve to offer to Adam? We no longer depict machines as fantasies for the future, equivalent to the 19th century image of the floor-scrubbing machine for the year 2000, because the majority of our fantasies of the past have arrived or are on the drawing board. Machines are now our indoor nature. Will they eventually also replace the landscape. Even so, we are not frightened. The future absorbs us. We realize, of course, that prediction does not work, but we still want to know. There have always been interesting views of how things might turn out. In 1925, George Routledge and Sons published a book called The Future by Archibald Montgomery Low, a research scientist and a prolific writer. During his life, Professor Low made a great many discoveries, including a method of transmitting images by wire. And among his numerous predictions were the portable telephone and space stations. In this book, he introduces a chapter on invention, which includes this picture. And he declares that invention is the offspring of sciences and art. It is in the science of the continuity of thought that invention and civilization become one. This drawing is called A Quiet Lunch at Home. The main occupation of the man, once he has finalized or finished feeding from the tube, is watching television, a flat wall-sized screen, and to communicate with the aid of the machine on the right marked A, with the outer world, other planets, the future, and women. The child's helmet has no contemporary equivalent, although it could be A.M. Low's invention for listening to music. The child is playing with an electric cat that is not so distant from from the Sony dog, Aibo. But of course, Aibo has a ball instead of a mouse, or it could be another electronic toy called Player that appears to respond with emotions, copying the behavior of real or extinct animals. Pleo here is the small dinosaur. His encounter with the dog is an artist's speculation. By and large, Professor Low was exceptionally prescient. Today, our desire for relationship with machines assumes or can assume three forms. One, it could be a relationship with friendly machines that we want to or need to communicate with. Two, a relationship with machines that become a part of us. And three, with machines that become us. There are by now quite a few face robots mimicking human expressions intended to improve our relationship with machines. Most of these face robots are females, although I have heard of a male robot called Julian declare with some conviction on YouTube, "I love you deeply as synthetic intelligence can." We don't know, of course, whom he was addressing. But one of the earliest prototype face robots was made by Professor Fumio Hara and his students at the Tokyo University of Technology during the 1980s. Hara was one of the first to work on expression and recognition of emotions. This is what the robot looks like without its covering skin. It is called AFR, Animate Face Robot. and the face is that of a young woman. Her face is capable of expressing 6 basic emotions: surprise, fear, disgust, anger, happiness, and sadness. The idea is also for her to convey the more subtle emotions in between. Since facial expressions are responsible for over half of our communication with one another, the purpose of Fumio Hara's work is to facilitate communication between robot and human. The robot, which consists solely of a head and neck, can also interpret facial expressions in humans and respond appropriately with its own. Her ultimate purpose may be a practical one, but her very presence, as in many other experiments in science and technology, appears to belong to the domain of art. Artists and scientists make use of the same technologies and the same materials. And like the scientist, the artist today is less concerned with aesthetic problems than with discovering and inventing new realities. But could we go a step further? Could we, in our conscious state, choose to incorporate the machine into our own body? Certainly, our awareness of the outer limits of a machine, where it begins and ends, is gradually dissolving. 15 years ago, the artist Stellak, and you have already seen his work before, he astonished his audience then and the internet community with his latest performance. With medical circuitry, implants in his body, he was wired via the internet to a number of computers throughout the world. By using a touch screen, visitors to centers where these computers were available, Media Lab in Helsinki, Centre Pompidou in Paris, and several others, could manipulate Stellak's movements by remote control. People watching the performance may have been disturbed. Stellak was not. He referred to the event as a metaphysical experience of watching his limbs move without his intention. Involuntary body, he called it. But what may seem unsatisfactory about the experiment is that neither Stellak nor his choreographers could know which individual is actually responsible for the movements of his body. This applies to much interactive art, when several people are engaged simultaneously in manipulating a single program or a single machine. The participants cannot know whether their action is responsible for the effect they witness. The case with Stellak's third arm, of course, is different, because it is the electrical impulses of his muscles that cause it to do whatever it does. Combining computer chips with the human nervous system is not common, not yet, nor are there many artists seeking such an intimate relationship with the machine. Stellak doesn't see people being taken over by cyborgs. It's more likely, he says, that the body will swallow the machine. Is the machine part of us, or are we part of it? Every epoch chooses its own definition of man, said Octavio Paz. He thought of a man as principally a transmitter of symbols and signs. That was about 70 years ago. If Adrienne Yennick and the particle group in Southern California are anything to go by, we have now moved beyond a world of signs and symbols. They look ahead to 2030. Their installations explore the possibility that with nanotechnology, the boundaries between humans and machines must fade. They are already concerned with the machine that becomes us. Nanoparticles can be manipulated and can manipulate. Their exhibition was called Particles of Interest. In the particle group, they contemplate the dangers of dematerialization. For obvious reasons, I cannot show you a picture. Their exhibition must be largely, or perhaps should be largely, invisible. We do not have senses enough to recognize nanoparticle manipulations of us or by us. Once we consider these possibilities to be serious, and it is not too early to do so, then the definition of cybernetics will require several more paragraphs in the dictionary. If particle group are stepping into a region that is not less fantastic than Alice's excursion into a 19th century second life, but her familiar wonderland pales beside the vistas opened up by nanotechnology. My question is, will today's Alice return from her travels? And will she want to? Thank you. That's it.